Hello listeners, welcome back to Luke's English Podcast. How are you doing today? I hope you're doing fine. So in this episode, I'm going to give you a free sample of the latest series of Luke's English Podcast Premium. I'm going to play some clips from some episodes in Premium Series 71, which is the most recent Premium series that I've done as I record this. Now, as you may know, I record free podcast episodes on a weekly basis. I publish new free episodes every week, but also I publish regular premium episodes, and I have this premium subscription that you can sign up for. And if you do subscribe to that, then you get access to all of the other premium episodes that I publish, in which I teach vocabulary and grammar and pronunciation. And so if you've ever wondered what kind of thing happens in Luke's English Podcast Premium, this episode is going to give you a taste of what it's like, okay? You'll learn some useful bits of vocabulary that can be applied to talking about a range of different topics and situations in English. These are all phrases which, if you use them right, can really make a difference to your English. It can make it more natural, precise, and clear. And if you like this and you want more, if you want the whole series, in fact, if you want all of the premium episodes I've ever done, and there's over 250 of them now, if you want access to all of them, with all their PDF worksheets and video versions, plus all the new episodes that will come out in the future, then you can sign up to Luke's English Podcast Premium. It's very simple. Just click the link in the description, teacherluke.co.uk/premium. You can check it out for yourself. The premium series that I'm going to play you some clips from was a vocabulary review from my recent episode about my holiday in Norway this year, episode 952. What I did was I went through that episode, which you might have heard, the one about my trip to Norway. You might have heard that episode. I picked out about 50 different phrases that I used in the episode, picked them out, and then in a very methodical way went through those phrases in this premium series and explained them, demonstrated them, gave you more examples, showed you very important details about how that vocabulary is actually normally used. And I also applied a process of sort of memory quizzes and controlled practice, free practice with personalized discussion questions, and also listen and repeat pronunciation practice with me, kind of trying to cover as much as possible in what is involved in really learning new English and expanding your English properly, okay? And that involves memory recall, personalization of language, because if you just understand words and phrases when you encounter them, this is obviously good, but you've really got to push it further in certain methodical and intentional ways. For example, you've got to practice memory recall. This is being able to come up with words and phrases yourself, actually say them yourself or write them down yourself, rather than just recognizing them when you see them. And then also being able to use new language to talk about yourself, to express yourself. Okay, this is actually how you learn English, by going through this process. And that is exactly what I try to do with you in episodes of Luke's English Podcast Premium. So that's what you're going to see in this episode. That's what I'd like to demonstrate for you. So I'm going to play a series of clips. The first clips I will play you will be little extracts from episode 952, where you'll just hear me talking about the beginning of my holiday, being away from my podcast for a few weeks and how that felt, and one of the paintings that I saw in an art gallery in Oslo, the Scream painting, the famous Scream painting, and a few other things. So you'll get a few extracts from the original episode. Then there's a couple of memory quizzes where I'm actually explaining bits of vocabulary, and you've got to try and tell me which words or phrases I'm looking for. So that tests your current knowledge, also your ability to notice things that I had said previously. Then I actually go into some more detail and explain the words and phrases and sort of, for example, point out different collocations and other aspects of the definitions, but also more examples to help you get a proper rounded sense of what the vocabulary means. And then after that, there's the pronunciation practice, where you can just repeat some lines after me, focusing on the correct sentence stress, rhythm, intonation, connected speech, and so on. And also, I'll show you some discussion questions which you can use to practice actually using the vocabulary yourself. Okay, so that's the process we're going to go through. So first of all, a couple of clips from episode 952. So let's go back a few weeks to when I talked about my holiday in Norway. And this is just going to be about 3 minutes worth. Listen carefully. Which bits of vocabulary do you think I'm going to point out in the rest of this episode? Okay, so let's get started. Here we go. So I just lived 5 weeks of non-podcast life, which, to be fair, doesn't happen to me all that often because I am a serial compulsive podcaster, and I have been for years. I'm always podcasting and rarely go more than a few days without recording and podcasting something. It sounds like I've got some sort of compulsive obsession, but I think it's okay. I think I've got it in check. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Luke, how did you cope with no podcasting for 5 weeks? Did your entire world fall apart? Did your brain explode? Did your brain fall out of your head or something? Well, actually, no, it was fine. And it was a welcome bit of headspace for me, in fact. Every time I found myself thinking about the podcast or doing some podcasting in my head and thinking about what I would say when I came back and did my first episode, which is actually this one, I just told myself, Luke, you're on holiday, empty your brain, just be like water, just be. This next clip is when I talked about my son, who is 2 years old, and he's got so much energy that I have to take him to the park on a regular basis. He starts climbing the walls, not literally, and sort of tearing the place apart. So going outside and visiting parks is really the only way. He never stays in one place for long, so I'm constantly chasing after him. But it's okay, it's a good way to let him blow off steam. To be fair, it is lovely being with him, and he's adorable. He's starting to speak now, and it's just amazing. But sometimes it is a bit stressful when you're in a dodgy park in central Paris, which probably, or let's say definitely, has rats living in it, and sometimes you see them. You might see one running across the path, or you see them in the bushes, which is not very nice. Not to mention bird poo on the floor and the occasional homeless person. But it's okay. It was good quality time with my little boy. Okay, so this next clip is when I talked about going to the Munch Museum, the Edvard Munch Museum in Oslo, and seeing the famous Scream painting. So in terms of the symbolism and visual language of the painting, its power lies in its masterful use of visual elements to convey emotion. So first of all, there is the distorted figure. This person is simplified. The person's features are simplified. His head is almost like a skull with a gaping mouth and wide eyes. And it does make you think of that mask from the movie Scream. You know, that famous white mask with the gaping mouth, the wide eyes. Surely it was partly influenced by this painting. This distortion removes the specific identity of the main figure, making it a universal symbol of human anguish. Its body seems to ripple and dissolve in the same way that the landscape does, suggesting that the figure is being consumed by the overwhelming feeling which is coming to him through nature. There's also the turbulent landscape. The background of swirling, fiery colours is a direct visual representation of the sound that Munch described. This scream through nature as the sun went down. The blood-red sky and the blue-black fjord are not just a description of a sunset, they're an emotional landscape. The swirling, curving lines creating a sense of chaos and instability, a direct contrast to the rigid, linear bridge which he is walking along, which represents the rational world that the figure has left behind. Okay, so just a couple of clips from the episode where I talked about a couple of different aspects of the holiday, including that painting, the scream that I mentioned earlier. So now you're going to get a couple of clips from Premium Series 71, and this is the memory quiz section. Essentially, let me explain some words and phrases for you that I actually used previously and see if you can identify. Tell me what the phrases are. Can you put them into sentences? Okay, let's just see what you noticed, what you know, what you're able to do here, and we'll go into the rest of the process afterwards. But first, memory quiz questions. Here we go. Right, so number 1. What would you call someone who can't stop making podcast episodes? I know you'd probably call them Luke, but what would you call someone, how would you describe someone who can't stop making podcast episodes, almost like it's an addiction? So you could say that, Luke, you are a podcaster, podcaster, someone who just can't stop doing it. So if you remember, I said I'm a serial podcaster. So compulsive is the word there. All right. So that was compulsive. Number 2, if you manage to keep your emotions or habits under control, what do you do? So the phrase, I said, I am a compulsive podcaster, but it's okay. I think I've got it. You could say, I think I've got it under control. I think I'm aware of it and I've got it under control. I've got it in something. I've got it in check, right? So, for example, the teacher managed to keep the noisy class in check. For me, I've got my podcasting habits in check. I mean, I've got my podcast in English. It's not in Czech. It's not in the Czech language. That would be weird, wouldn't it? It's like, have you heard Luke's got his podcast in Czech? What, he started doing it in Czech? No, it's in English, but it's in Czech. I see. He has it under control. He's not too obsessive about it. No, he's got his English podcast in Czech. Yeah, okay. Right, number 3. When life is hard, what verb phrase means to manage it or to deal with it? We've probably done this one before, but this is a pretty high frequency phrase. Something difficult, but you're dealing with it. Okay? Particularly things in your life, maybe emotional things. She found it hard to the stress of moving to a new country. Found it hard to deal with it. Found it hard to remember? Cope with, right? So to cope with something. Yeah, I think in the episode I was saying that, I was away from the podcast for 5 weeks. So, and you might be thinking, Luke, how did you cope with that? With not being able to podcast for 5 weeks? Okay, moving on. Number 4, if you go for a run or shout to release stress or frustration, what are you doing? So you build up stress or frustration. Maybe you go and play a game of football on a Wednesday evening or something, and it helps you to relieve all your stress. It's cathartic. Maybe you go for a run. Maybe you just shout. I don't know, go into the forest and just and then you come back and you feel much better. In the case of my kids, especially my son, he's got a lot of energy, you know, he needs to release that energy. So anyway, the phrase or the idiom is to blow, to blow what? To blow off steam, right? To blow off steam. You can imagine a cooker, a pan, a saucepan, boiling water with the lid on, and as the water boils, it fills up with steam, and if there's a hole in the top, then the steam comes flying out. So opening the hole allows it to blow off steam. Similarly, people, we need to do the same thing where pressure, stress builds up, and we need to do things to help get all of that pressure out. We need to blow off steam. Number 31, what adjective means stiff, inflexible, or unwilling to change? Stiff, inflexible, unwilling to change. This is the system, and we always stick to the system. We don't change. The system cannot be changed. It's like, I found that system very inflexible. It's very, it's very, begins with an R, very, very not restrictive, restricted, maybe, rigid, rigidity. Yes. Okay, this is like the opposite of flexibility, is rigidity. And if something's flexible, the opposite of that is it's rigid. Yes, like a rigid system. How did I use that? Talking about my holiday in Norway, we will see. Number 32. What adjective describes things that go in straight lines or progress logically? This is one after the other in a straight line. Like, for example, a storyline in a movie. Most movies, most books tell a story. They start with the beginning, then they, as time progresses, the story follows the chronological order. So it's all in one line. But then some stories, they mix it up where you get flashback sequences, or even something like Pulp Fiction, Quentin Tarantino's film, where the first section of the film is actually what chronologically happens at the end of the story. But you see it first. So it's all cut up. It's not linear. It's not linear. So linear is everything going in straight lines or progressing logically one thing after the other. Right, that's linear. Okay, so those were some memory quiz questions. Did you get them all right? I wonder how many you got right. Let's now have a look at a couple of other clips, again from part 1 and from part 3. This is where I'm explaining those phrases, clarifying them, giving you clear definitions and providing you with more examples to give you a proper rounded sense of what these words and phrases mean and how they're used. So let's see those clips now. Right, so let me go through those and just give you some more bits of teaching. So the first one was compulsive, right? A serial compulsive podcaster. Originally I said I am a serial compulsive podcaster and have been for years. So I'm talking about the definition of this is someone who records and publishes podcasts very frequently and almost obsessively. The serial part, S-E-R-I-A-L, serial meaning again and again and again, like a serial killer. In this case, a serial podcaster. I think the serial podcast is slightly better than being a serial killer, I think. Of course it is. Why would there be any doubt? I mean, although saying that, serial killers are very popular and successful in media, though, aren't they? I mean, there's so many shows and films about serial killers. It does make me wonder about the human population. Why are we all so fascinated by that? I don't know. Anyway, I'm a serial podcaster, just one after the other, again and again and again. But I'm a compulsive podcaster as well, which means that I just kind of like almost can't stop doing it. So if I just have an idea, suddenly I have to do it. If I've got an afternoon free, I just think, well, I could just relax and enjoy doing nothing. But no, I think I'll do a podcast. It's just, it's a compulsion. So cereal, I've just mentioned this again and again, like a serial killer, but not cereal, the thing you eat. That's like cornflakes. That's cereal with a C. That's C-E-R-E-A-L. And that's what you eat for breakfast, all right? Yeah, okay. Compulsive, something happens because you get an urge, a strong, sudden urge or motivation to do it. This is an urge that you might not be able to control. A compulsive liar, for example, right? We do say that. A compulsive liar is someone who can't stop lying. A compulsive gambler is someone who is addicted to podcasting. A compulsive podcaster is someone who feels sudden motivations to keep making podcast episodes. The part of speech, it's a noun phrase, right? A compulsive podcaster is a noun phrase. Compulsive is an adjective. Another example, she is a serial compulsive podcaster releasing 2 or 3 episodes a week without fail. Okay, by calling myself a serial compulsive podcaster, it was supposed to be humorous and slightly self-deprecating. Combining the idea of being compulsive, it's hard to stop, with serial, meaning repeatedly. Yeah. Number 2, to have something in check or to keep something in check. C-H-E-C-K. Keep something in check. Or, don't worry, I've got it in check. Don't worry, I'm trying to keep it in check. So I'm a compulsive podcaster, but I think I've got it in check. Meaning, I've got it under control. Right? It's a verb phrase, to keep something in check. The teacher managed to keep the noisy class in check. So, the teacher kept the noisy class under control. She kept them in check. It's often used for emotions, You know, I'm very excited, but it's okay. I've got it in check. Habits, you know, I'm a compulsive collector of vintage Nintendos, but it's okay. I've got it in check. I've only got 300 N64s in my apartment, so it's all right. I've got it in check. Or disruptive behaviour. I don't know what that would be. Any disruptive behaviour, just like, you know, he's got Tourette's. He can't stop shouting, but it's okay. He's getting it in check, getting it under control. I don't know. Okay. Number 3, to cope with something, right? For example, Luke, how did you cope with no podcasting for 5 weeks? So it means to deal effectively with something, to manage it. She found it hard to cope with the stress of moving to a new country, for example. It's a very common phrase in everyday and academic English. It's used in all sorts of contexts, often linked with stress or change or hardship. Okay? How would you cope? I don't know. Are you as addicted to listening to my podcast as I am to making it? And if I, for example, had taken 5 weeks off, as I did, but just not managed to produce 5 episodes to be released while I was away, if I hadn't done that, how would you have coped without Luke's English podcast for 5 weeks? I think you would have survived. I'm sure there are episodes in the archive that you haven't heard. You could just go back into the archive and find some old episodes that you haven't heard yet. They might be a few years old, but they're still fresh. I hope. You know, we use these words to talk about art. You can also use them to talk about politics or economics or emotions, society, you know. It's why sometimes I think using a topic-based approach where it's like, here's the language we use to talk about art, here's the language we use to talk about politics, but you often find that they actually mix. You end up with, we use expressions for talking about, for example, the natural world, like water or weather, when you're talking about the economy. So it's just it's quite useful to see that, to know that you might be thinking, but Luke, I'm not really interested in art. Okay, but you might be interested in economics. And so it's interesting to note that all these words are often transferable, you know, across different sort of topic areas. Number 31 is rigid. Rigid. Again, talking about the painting, the rigid bridge. So all these swirling lines, the swirling shapes, the chaos, the instability of the water, the sky, and the figure in the front having a panic attack is a contrast to the rigid bridge, where with its clear straight lines, this linear bridge that stretches off into the distance, straight line. This represents the rational world that the figure has left behind. So rigid, stiff, inflexible, not easily changed. The rules, we often say the rules were too rigid to allow any creativity. You know, like at my school, there was no room for creativity or for much individual thought. It was a very rigid system, and there was no room for improvisation intellectually. So this can describe objects like rigid metal, which doesn't flex or bend, or rigid thinking, right, to describe attitudes. Okay. Yeah. Number 32, linear. Linear. There's that word again, linear, in a straight line. So the linear bridge, in this case, in the background of the painting. Linear means consisting of straight lines, progressing in a straight or logical sequence. Okay? So a linear perspective. This is common in maths, it's common in art, it's common in writing styles. A linear narrative, as I said before, Pulp Fiction. It begins with John Travolta and Samuel L. Jackson in the diner situation. And then there are the 2 other characters, Pumpkin and Honey Bunny, who decide that they're going to rob the diner. And they, with their guns, they try to rob the diner. And then they come across these 2 badass assassins, played by John Travolta and Samuel L. Jackson. And then the film rewinds. It goes back to another a whole other part of the narrative. So the narrative is not linear. It starts here, it goes back here, then moves back there again. That's one of the brilliant things about Pulp Fiction. Have you seen it? That Quentin Tarantino film? Films with non-linear narratives are often very interesting because they allow you to tell a different story, or see a different story. Whereas most stories, most novels, most books, most films do tell a linear narrative where everything happens in chronological order, one thing after another, which is the classic way to tell a story. So anyway, linear in a straight line, one thing after another. A linear narrative, in this case, a linear bridge. Okay, so now I'd like to play you a clip from part 5 in Premium Series 71. And in part 5, it was all about pronunciation practice. And so you're going to be able to repeat after me. So there are some lines from an article which I created, which included all of the vocabulary that I taught in the other parts of this series. And so the focus here is on repeating after me and copying the rhythm, the stress and the intonation as well. Okay, so listen with me. And then when you get the chance, actually repeat what I'm saying out loud. So this will give you an idea of what happens in pronunciation episodes in my premium subscription. So here we go. Look at the text and mark these things. So first of all, mark the pauses. So each time there is a pause, either a small pause or a big pause, mark it in some way. Now you can mark those pauses with a pen or by drawing on the screen. Just mark sort of two lines, or a line or 2 lines to mark in the text where there should be a pause. You could do that with a pen or by annotating the screen, but the best way is to actually copy the text and paste it into a document that you can manipulate. Then you can create a new line for each pause. So every time there's a pause, you hit enter and it puts that onto a new line. So you're doing each chunk on a line. The result will be that you will convert the article into a series of chunks or lines with pauses that separate each one. Okay, then you can think about sentence stress. For each chunk, decide which words are stressed. And there's usually at least one main stressed syllable in each chunk, but often other words are stressed a bit too. So basically decide which words you think should be stressed, which words should be given emphasis, and underline at least one stressed syllable in each chunk. Okay, and then intonation. Consider if there are moments when your voice should go up or down, okay? And this is especially true at the end of each chunk, okay? And so should your voice go up or should it go down? And you can mark those things with an arrow, either an arrow pointing upwards or an arrow pointing downwards, okay? Now, intonation is more complex than that, but this is just to give you a hand, basically. It just keeping it simple can be helpful, right? So basically, are you going up or are you going down? And you can mark those things with a little arrow. Now, let me give you an example, okay? Here's the first paragraph of the text with my sound scripted version underneath it. So the first paragraph of the text, I could say the first paragraph now a bit like a robot. So I'm going to do it without sound scripting it. So it sounds like this. This is the boring, bad version, the robot version. In a world of constant notifications and a compulsive urge to check our phones, many of us feel mentally overloaded. Modern life often seems like a rigid, linear timeline, work, screens, deadlines. To stay sane, we try to keep things in check, to manage stress levels, relationships, and commitments. But even the most disciplined mind can struggle to cope with all the noise. All right, now that wasn't very good. I pronounced each word correctly, but it wasn't really well presented. So here is my sound scripted version. This is an example of what I want you to do with the rest of the text. And if you look at the PDF, you will actually see the scripted version where I've broken it into chunks and I've annotated it in that way. So it sounds like this. In a world of constant notifications and a compulsive urge to check our phones, many of us feel mentally overloaded. Modern life often seems like a rigid, linear timeline. Work, screens, deadlines. To stay sane, we try to keep things in check, to manage stress levels, relationships, and commitments. But even the most disciplined mind can struggle to cope with all the noise. Okay, so that's the sound scripted version. What you can do now is repeat those lines after me. Okay, so let's just work on a bit of listen and repeat with that first paragraph before you look at the rest of the text and sound script the other 6 paragraphs that you will find. So just repeat after me, okay? In a world of constant notifications, in a world of constant notifications, in a world of constant notifications, and a compulsive urge to check our phones, in a world of constant notifications and a compulsive urge to check our phones, many of us feel mentally overloaded. Many of us feel mentally overloaded. Many of us feel mentally overloaded. I'll try not to interrupt too much because I know you just want to repeat, but I have to say sometimes the way that I've added intonation with arrows on the script that you might be looking at, I mean, it depends on your interpretation, right? But this is the way I'm doing it. And so just to avoid ambiguity, let's just say that my way is the correct way. In actual fact, there might be other possibilities. You know, for example, choosing when you go down at the end. Normally we tend to go down when you make a conclusion or when you come to the end of a point. You tend to go up, up, up like that when you are kind of setting up the situation and before you have reached your conclusion in whatever point you're making, we tend to go up, up, up like that. And then when we actually finally finish that particular point, we go down at the end. Right? Okay. Modern life often seems like a rigid linear timeline. Modern life often seems like a rigid linear timeline. Modern life often seems like a rigid linear timeline. Work, screens, deadlines. Work, screens, deadlines. Modern life often seems like a rigid linear timeline. Work, screens, deadlines. To stay sane, we try to keep things in check. To stay sane, we try to keep things in check. To stay sane, we try to keep things in check. It sounds like I'm going up. To keep things in check. To stay sane, we try to keep things in check. Okay, let's say it like that. To stay sane, we try to keep things in check. To manage stress levels, relationships, and commitments. To manage stress levels, relationships, and commitments. But even the most disciplined mind can struggle to cope with all the noise. But even the most disciplined mind can struggle to cope with all the noise. But even the most disciplined mind can struggle to cope with all the noise. Okay, so that was a little clip of the pronunciation part. In the actual episode, there are more sections. There are about 5 or 6 paragraphs that you can practice repeating after me, which is, I think, a very good exercise in just shadowing, basically, or controlled pronunciation practice. And then finally, I just want to share discussion questions which I've created for this vocabulary, right? So this would be the sort of end of the process. After you've done all of that practice, you can actually try to personalize the vocabulary by using it to talk about yourself or express your own ideas. So for the word compulsive, questions are this. Do you know anyone who is a bit compulsive? What do they do? Are you compulsive in any way? What are you compulsive about? I can be a bit compulsive. I mean, I talked about being a compulsive podcaster. I think that is a compulsion that I have. Sometimes I just feel like I just really have to do a podcast episode. And instead of maybe taking an afternoon off and just resting, I just feel that I have this need to record a new podcast episode. It's become a sort of habit to express myself or record my thoughts in an episode, and so I often feel compelled to do new episodes, but I think I've got it in check. So the next one is to keep something in check, or to have something in check. What habits or emotions do you need to keep in check in your daily life? So as you hear these questions, by the way, you could pause the podcast and actually say them out loud, or just use them later. Like, go and check. There's a PDF for this episode, by the way. Check the PDF and look at the questions and actually take the time to give your answers out loud in English. It makes a big difference to being able to not only use the vocabulary again properly later, but actually remember it, So what habits or emotions do you need to keep in check in your daily life? I think I'm not the only one. I think there's a lot of people who have to make sure that we don't do certain habits. Like I try to eat well, even though sometimes I feel a compulsion to eat chocolate, especially after I've eaten lunch or dinner. I've had my lunch and dinner, and afterwards I just feel like I really want to have something sweet or chocolatey. But I obviously can't eat too much chocolate. I've got to look after my health. So that's something I need to keep in check. And obviously, you try not to drink too much alcohol. Sometimes at the end of a day, in the evening, you feel like, a glass of wine or a can of beer. You feel that you need that just to kind of relax at the end of the day. But that's not the most healthy habit. You shouldn't drink on a daily basis. So that's something I have to keep in check. And I think I'm basically managed to do that. It is something I managed to keep in check. My wife doesn't drink, so that definitely helps me to keep my drinking in check. It's not really a thing that we do at home. We don't drink a lot. So I think I've definitely got my drinking in check these days. To cope with something. What was the hardest situation you've ever had to cope with when traveling or living abroad? Of course, having lived in Japan, their summers can be very, very hot and humid, and that was very difficult to cope with for me. I found it difficult to cope with the hot, humid August weather in the Tokyo area. It was just so humid, so hot. It was hard to escape the heat. Obviously, there's air conditioning, which you could switch on at home. I had air conditioning in my apartment, but I found it difficult to cope with the air conditioning as well, to be honest. I found it very dehydrating or something. I'm not used to living in air conditioned environments. So either it was unbelievably hot and humid, or it was all kind of cold and dry because of the air conditioning. I found it very difficult to get the balance right, found it difficult to cope with that. That might have contributed to me getting very exhausted and ultimately getting sick and ending up in hospital for a couple of weeks. I think that probably didn't help, not being able to cope with the climate. I'm sure, have you heard the story? You must have done my Sick in Japan story. You can go back into the episode archive and listen to that if you want to. Sick in Japan. Can't remember the episode number, but it was difficult to cope with the weather in the summer weather in Japan. The next phrase is to blow off steam. So after a stressful day, how do you actually blow off steam? What's your favourite stress relief activity? Well, I like to blow off steam by playing music. Actually, I play the drums in a band, and that helps me to blow off steam. Playing the drums for an hour or two with my bandmates, playing songs, it's quite physical. It requires a lot of energy, and it allows me to blow off steam. I feel much more relaxed afterwards. It's a good way to get rid of tension and stress. So I blow off steam these days by playing the drums for a couple of hours. That does me the world of good, I think. The next word is rigid. So have you ever had a teacher or boss or a rule that was too rigid? How did you cope? So I don't know, what was it like at your school? Were there a lot of rules? Was it a very rigid system? Have you ever had a boss that had a very rigid approach to managing his staff or her staff? How was that? And when is it good to be rigid? When is it better to be flexible? I guess this is something I have to think about as an English teacher. How do I manage my classroom? Should I be very rigid about the activities we do, the things we do? Or can I be a bit more flexible in my approach, a bit more able to change what I'm doing to meet the needs or requirements or preferences of my students? Am I able to give the learners a lot more control over what we do? Or do I impose a much more rigid system on my English lessons where it's like, I'm the teacher, I know the best way for you to learn, so we're going to do it my way. That's the way it's going to be done. So yes, it's kind of some classes require the rigid approach and some classes require a more fluid, flexible approach. I find that the classes that need the more rigid approach often are ones that perhaps are less motivated, and you need to kind of keep them in line, keep them in check, let's say. And the ones where you could be more flexible, often this works with students who are much more independent or much more motivated, meaning that they know what they want, they have a lot of motivation, they drive the lesson forward just in their enthusiasm for learning English, and you're there to kind of support them, and you're able to follow them this way and that way. You don't need to impose a rigid structure on what they want, because they're already driving it with their own motivation and their own questions and things like that. So yeah, you need to be both rigid and flexible, and then linear as well. So do you prefer films or books with a linear storyline, or ones that jump around in time? So I gave the example, I think, of the film Pulp Fiction. Have you actually seen it? Quentin Tarantino's Pulp Fiction. And there are probably other films and stories with a non-linear narrative. So what do you prefer? Do you prefer films where the events happen one after the other, just a linear narrative? Or do you prefer a more non-linear approach where the things you see in the film happen in a different order? I'm trying to think of other examples of non-linear films. Can you think of any other examples of films that don't have a linear narrative, where maybe you start in the middle of the narrative and then it flashes back to show you previous moments and you jump around? Those films can be kind of fun and interesting and a bit more original, whereas films with a standard linear narrative, it's much more common, but they can seem a little bit boring and ordinary, can't they? Okay, so that's the end of this episode. And that has been a sample, just a sample of what you get from LEP Premium. Just a sample. So there were, like I said, over 50 phrases, 50 bits of vocabulary in Premium Series 71. So if you want to get the whole lot, just sign up for Luke's English Podcast Premium. You'll find the link in the description, or go to teacherluke.co.uk/premium. You'll get access to all of the premium episodes. They're all available on the premium website, and you can easily add LEP Premium to a podcast app on your phone, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and you can listen to the episodes there, and you'll find links for PDFs for every episode and also video versions of every episode too, and they're full of everything you need to guide you in your learning with each episode. teacherluke.co.uk/premium, or just click the link in the description. Okay, all right, nice one. Good. 5, that's 5 goods. In fact, 10, because I said it twice, didn't I? Even more than that. I mean, it's just very good. Lots of goodness in this episode. I hope you agree. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. I will speak to you again next time. But for now, it's time to say goodbye. Bye.